This is one of the essays from a collection of essays by Isaac Berlin. The title of this collection called The Russian Thinkers. The essay's title is Tolstoy, Enlightenment. Two things always said about the court. Tolstoy wrote the celebrated Russian critic Mikhail in a forgotten essay published in the mid-1870s. It is an outstanding writer of fiction and a banned thinker. It has become a sort of axiom needing no demonstration. This almost universal verdict has reigned virtually unchallenged for something like 100 years. And Mikhail's attempt to question it remained relatively isolated. Tolstoy dismissed his left-wing ally as a routine liberal hack, and expressed surprise that anyone should take an interest in him. This was characteristic, but unjust. The essay, which its author called The Right Hand, the Left Hand of Leo Tolstoy, is a brilliant and convincing defense of Tolstoy on both intellectual and moral grounds, directed mainly against the liberals and the socialists who saw in the novelist's ethical doctrines, and in particular, in the glorifications of peasants and natural instinct, its constant disparagement of scientific culture, a perverse and sophisticated obscurantism which discredits the liberal cause and played into the hands of praise and the reactionaries. Mikhail rejects this view, and in the course is a long, careful attempt to shift the enlightened grain from the reactionary chaff in Tolstoy's opinions, reaches the conclusion that there was an unresolved and unavowed conflict in the great novelist's conceptions both of human nature and of the problems facing Russia and Western civilization. Mikhail maintains that so far from being a banned thinker, Tolstoy was no less acute, clear-eyed, and convincing analyst of ideas and of instincts or characters or actions. In the zeal for his paradoxical thesis, paradoxical certainly at the time at which he wrote it, Mikhail sometimes goes too far, but in substance seems to me to be right, or at any rate more right than wrong, and my own remarks are no more than extended gloss on it. Tolstoy's opinion is always subjective and can be, as for example in the writings on Shakespeare or Dante or Wagner, widely perverse. But the question which in his most didactic essays he tried to answer are nearly always cardinal questions of a principle, always first-hand and count far deeper, in the deliberately simplified and naked form in which he usually presents them, and those of more balanced and objective thinkers. The regulation always tend to be disturbing. Tolstoy uses this gift to the full to destroy both his own peace and that of his readers. It was this habit of asking exaggerated, simple but fundamental questions to which he did not himself, at any rate in the 1860s and the 1870s, possess the answer that gave him the reputation of being a nihilist. Yet he certainly had no desire to destroy for the sake of destruction. What he desired more than anything else in the world was to know the truth. How annihilating this passion can be is shown by others who had chosen to cut below the limits set by the wisdom of their generation. Machiavelli, Pascal, Rousseau, the author of the book Job, like them, Tolstoy cannot be fitted into any of the public movements of his own, or indeed any other age. The only companion to which Tolstoy belongs is a subversive one for the questioners, to whom no answer has been or seems like to be given, at least no answer which they or those who understand them will begin to accept. As for Tolstoy, the positive idea, and they varied less during his long life than has sometimes been represented, they're not at all unique. They have something in common with the French Enlightenment of the 18th century, something with those of the 20th century, a little with those of their own times. Russian belonged to neither of the great ideological streams which divide educated opinion in the country during his youth. He was not a radical intellectual with his eye turned to the West, nor a Slavophile, that is to say, a believer in a Christian and nationalist monarchy. His view can't across those categories, like the radicals, and always condemn political repression, arbitrary violence, economic exploitation, and all uncreates the perpetuates inequality among men. But the rest is the westernizing outlook, the heart of the ideology of the intelligentsia, the overwhelming sense of civic responsibility, the belief in natural science as the door to all truth in social and political reform, in democracy, material progress, secularism. The celebrated amalgam Tolstoy rejected early in life. On the other hand, he believed in individual liberty and indeed in progress too, but in a queer sense of his own. He looked with contempt on liberals and the socialists, with even greater hatred on the right-wing parties at his time. His close affinity, as has often been remarked, is with Rousseau. He liked and admired Rousseau's view more than those of any other modern writer. Like Rousseau, he rejected the doctrine of original sin and believed that a man was born innocent and has been ruined by his own bad institutions, especially by what passed for education among civilized men. Like Rousseau again, he put the blame for this process of decadence largely on the intellectuals, the self-appointed elites of experts, sophisticated courtiers, remote from common humanity, self-estranged from natural life. These men are damned because they have all, but lost the most precious of all human possessions, the capacity with which all men are born to see the truth, the immutable, eternal truth, which only charlatans and sophists represent as varying in different circumstances at times and places. The truth which is visibly fully only to the innocent eye, and those whose heart has not been corrupted. Children, peasants, those not blinded by vanity and pride, the simple, the good. Education, as the West understands it, ruins innocence. That is why children resisted it bitterly and instinctively. That is why it has to be ran down their throats, and like all coercion and violence, maim the victim, and at times destroys him beyond redress. Man craves for truth by nature. Therefore, true education must be of such a kind that children and unsophisticated ignorant people will absorb readily and eagerly. But to understand this, to discover how to apply this knowledge, the educated must put away their intellectual arrogance and make a new beginning. They must purge their minds of theories, of false, quasi-scientific analogies between the world of man and the world of animals, or of men and inanimate things. Only then will they be able to establish a personal relationship with the uneducated, a relationship which only humanity and the love can achieve. In modern times, only Rousseau and Bumpers Dickens seem to him have seen this. Certainly the people's condition will never be improved until not only the czarists, the bureaucracy, but the progressists, and Tolstoy calls them the vain and the doctrinaire intelligentsia, are praised off. The people's next, the common peoples, and the chosen too. So as fanatical theorists bedevil education, it is to be hopeful. Even the old-fashioned village praise, so Tolstoy maintains one of his early tracts, was less harmful. He knew little. I was clumsy, idle, and stupid. But he treats his pupils as human beings, not as a scientist treats specimens in a laboratory. He did what he could. He was often corrupt, ill-tempered, unjust, but these were human natural vices, and therefore their effects, unlike those of the machine-made model instructors, inflicted no permanent injury. With these ideas, not surprising to find that Tolstoy was personally happier among the Slavophile reactionaries who rejected their ideas, but at least they seemed to him to have some contact with reality, the land, the peasants, traditional ways of life. At least they believe in the primacy of spiritual values and the futility of trying to change man by changing the more superficial sides of their life by political or constitutional reform. But the Slavophiles also believe in the Orthodox Church, in the unique historical destiny of the Russian people, the sanctity of history, a divinely ordained process, and therefore the justification of many absurdity because they were native and ancient, and therefore instruments in the divine tactic. They lead by a Christian faith in the great mystical body, and once community and church of the generation of the faithful, past, present, and yet unborn. Intellectually, Tolstoy repudiated this. Temperamentally, responded to this all too strongly. He understood well only the nobility and the peasants, and the former better than the latter. He shared many instinctive beliefs with his country neighbors. Like them, he had a natural aversion to all forms of middle-class liberalism. The bourgeoisie scarcely appears in his novels. His attitude to parliamentary democracy, the rights of women, universal suffrage were different from that of Corbett or Carlyle or Proudhon or D.H. Lawrence. He shared deeply the Slavophiles' suspicions of all scientific and the theoretical generalizations as such. And this created a bridge which made personal relations with the Moscow Slavophiles congenial to him. But his intellect was not at one with his instinct convictions. As a thinker, he had profound affinities with the 18th century philosophy. Like them, he looked upon the patriarchal Russian state, the church, with the Slavophiles defended as organized and hypocritical conspiracies. As the great thinkers of the Enlightenment, he looked for values not in history, not in the sacred missions of nations or cultures or churches, but in the individual's own personal experience. Like them too, he believed in internal and not in historical involving truths or values, rejected with both hands the romantic notion of race or nation or culture as a creative agent, still more the Hegelian conception of history as a self-realization of a self-perfecting reason incarnated in man or in movements or in institutions, ideas which had deeply influenced his generation. All his life he looked on this as a cloudy metaphysical nonsense. This clear, cold, uncompromised realism is quite explicit in the notes, the diaries, the letters of his early life. The reminiscence of those who knew him as a boy and as a student in the University for Kazan reinforces impression. His character was deeply conservative, with a streak of caprice and irrationality. But his mind remained calm, logical, and unswerving. He followed the argument easily and fearlessly to whatever extreme it led him, a typical and sometimes fatally Russian combination of qualities. What did not satisfy his critical sense, he rejected. He left the University of Kazan because he decided that the professors were incompetent and that was trivial insults, like Helvetians, that is, friends in the mid-18th century, Tolstoy denounced theology, history, and the teaching of dead languages, the entire classical curriculum, as accumulation in data and rules that no reasonable man could wish to know. History particularly irritated him as a systematic attempt to answer non-existing questions with all the real issues carefully left out. History is like a deaf man replying to questions which nobody puts to him. He announced to the startled fellow students while they were both locked in the university detention room for some minor acts of insubordination. The first extended statement is a full ideological position belonging to the 1860s. The occasion for it was his decision to compose a treatise on education. All his intellectual strength and all his prejudice went into this attempt. In 1860, Tolstoy was then 32 years old, found himself in one of his periodical moral crises. He had acquired some fame as a writer. So a poem, sketches, childhood, adolescence, and youth, 2 or 3 shorter tales that had been praised by the critics. He was on terms of friendship with some of the most gifted of exceptional talent generation writers in his country. Turgenev, Nekrasov, Goncharov, Panayev, Pinsimsky, Fett. His writing struck everyone by its freshness, sharpness, marvelous descriptive power, and the precision and originality of its images. The style was at times criticized as awkward and even barbarous, but it was unquestionably the most promising the younger prose writer had in the future, and his literal friends felt reservations about him. He paid visits to the literary salons, both right and the left wing. Political divisions that always existed were becoming sharper in Pittsburgh and Moscow, but he seemed at ease in none of them. He was bold, imaginative, independent, but was not a man of letters, fundamentally concerned with the problems of literature and writing, still less of writers, and wandered in from another less intellectual, more aristocratic, and more primitive world. He was a well-born dilettante, but that was nothing new. The poetry of Pushkin, his contemporaries, unequaled in the history of Russian literature, had been created by amateurs of genius. It was not his origin, but his unconcealed indifference to the literary life, as such, to the habits or problems of professional writers, editors, publicists, that made his friends among the men of letters feel uneasy in his presence. This worldly, clever young officer could be exceedingly agreeable. His love for writing was genuine and very deep, but the literary gathering he was contemptuous, formidable, and reserved. He did not dream of opening his heart in a milieu dedicated to intimate, unending self-revelation. It was inscrutable, disdainful, disconcerting, arrogant, a little frightening. He no longer, it was true, lived in the life of an aristocratic officer. The wild nights on which the young radical looked with hatred and contempt as characteristic of the dissipated habits of the reactionary Tennessee Doré no longer amused him. The married and settled down, he was in love with his wife and became for a time a model, if occasionally exasperating husband, but did not trouble to conceal the fact he had far more respect for all forms of real life, whether of the free Cossacks in the Caucasus, or that of the rich young Guards officers in Moscow, with the race horses, balls, and gypsies. Then for the world of books, reviews, critics, professors, political discussions to talk about ideals, opinions, and literary values. Moreover, he was opinionated, quarrelsome, and times exceptionally savage, with the result that his literary friends treated him with a nervous respect. In the end, drew away from him. Upon mercy, he abandoned them. Apart from the poet Fed, who was an eccentric, deeply conservative country squire himself, Tolstoy has no intimates among the writers of his own generation. His bridge with Turgenev is well known. It was even remoter from the other litterateurs. He liked Nekrasov better than his poetry, but then Nekrasov was editor of a genius and admired and encouraged Tolstoy from the earliest beginnings. The sense of the contrast between life and literature haunted Tolstoy. It made him doubt his own vocation as a writer. Like other young Russian of birth or fortune, was conscience-stricken by the appalling condition of the peasants. Mere reflection or denunciation seemed to him a will of invading action. He must act. He must start with his own estate. Like the 18th century radical, he was convinced that men were born equal and were made unequal by the way in which they were brought up. He established a school for the boys in his own village, and dissatisfied with educational theories, then Yuvik in Russian decided to go abroad to study Western method in theory and in practice. He derived a great deal from his visit to England, France, Switzerland, Belgium, Germany, including the title of his greatest novel. But his conversations with the most advanced Western authorities on education and observations of their methods had convinced him that this method was at best worthless, and worst, harmful to the children upon whom they were practiced. He did not stay long. England paid little attention to its antiquated schools. In France, he found that learning was almost entirely mechanical, by rote. Prepared questions, lists of dates, for example, were answered competently because they had been learned by heart. The same children asked for the same fact from some unexpected angle, often produced absurd replies, which shows that the knowledge meant nothing to them. The schoolboy who replied that the murderer of Henry IV of France was Julius Caesar seemed to him typical. The boy not understood nor took an interest in the facts he had stored up. And most all that was gained was a mechanical memory. But the true home of theory was Germany. The pages which Tolstoy devotes to describing teaching and teachers in Germany rival and anticipate the celebrated pages in the War Peace, in which it makes a sandwich of fun of admired experts in another field, the German strategies exploited by the Russian army, which it represents as grotesque, and pompous dots. In Yaslaya Polyana, a journal which he had privately printed in 1861-2, Tolstoy speaks his educational visit to the West, and by way of example, gives a hair-raising, exceedingly entertaining account of the latest method of teaching the alphabet used by a specially trained in one of the most advanced of the German teachers' seminaries. It describes the pedantic, immensely self-satisfied schoolmaster, and he enters the room and notes with approval that the children are seated at their desks, crushed and obedient, in total silence and prescribed by German rules of behavior. He casts a look around the class and knows already what is that this ought to understand. He knows this, and he knows what the children's souls are made of, and much else that the seminary and taught him. He's armed with the latest and most progressed pedagogic volume called Das Fischbank. It contains pictures of fish. "What is, dear children?" "A fish," replied the brightest. "No," and will not rest until some children said that what he saw is not a fish, but a book. "That is better." "And what do books contain?" "Letters," said the boldest boy. "No, no," said the schoolmaster soundly. "You really must think what you are saying." By this time, the children are beginning to be hopelessly demoralized, and no notion of what they are meant to say. They have a confused, perfectly correct feeling that the schoolmaster wants them to say something unintelligible. That the fish is not a fish. Whatever it is he wants them to say is something they will never think of. The thoughts begin to stray. They wonder, that is very Tolstoyan, why the teacher is wearing spectacles, why he's looking through them instead of taking them off, and so on. The teacher urges them to concentrate. He hurries and tortures them until he manages to make them see that what they see is not a fish, but a picture. And then, after more torture, that the picture represents a fish. That is what he wants them to say. Would it not be easier, Tolstoy, to make them learn this piece of profound wisdom by heart instead of tormenting them with the Fishbach method, which is so far from causing them to think creatively, merely stupefy them? The genuinely intelligent children knew that their answers are already wrong. They can't tell why. Not only that this is so. While the stupid, who occasionally provide the right answer, do not know why they are praised. All that the German pedagogue is doing is to fade dead human material, or rather living human beings, into a gross mechanical contraption invented by fanatical fools who think that this is a willful applying scientific method to the education of men. Tolstoy assured us, and his account, of which I have quoted only a short fragment, is not a parody, but a faithful production of what he saw and heard in the advanced schools of Germany, in those schools in England that has been fortunate enough to acquire this wonderful methods. Disillusioned and indignant, Tolstoy returned to his Russian estate and began to teach the village children himself. He built schools, continued to study, reject, denounce current doctrines of education, published periodicals, the pamphlets, invented a new method of learning, geography, zoology, physics, composed an entire manual arithmetic of his own. He went against all methods of coercion, especially those which consist of forcing children against their will to memorize the facts, the dates, the figures. In short, he behaves like our original, enlightened, energetic, opinionated, somewhat eccentric 18th century landowner who had become a convert to the doctrines of Rousseau or the Ambi Mamli. His accounts is a series and experiments fill 2 stout volumes in the preliminary editions of his eclectic works. They're still fascinating, if only because they contain some of the best descriptions of village life, and especially children, both comical, lyrical, and even he had ever composed. He wrote them in the 1860s and 1870s, when he was at the height of his creative powers. His overriding didactic purpose is easily forgotten in the unrivaled insight into the twisting, crisscrossing pattern of the thoughts and feelings of individual village children, and the marvelous concreteness and imagination with which their talk and behavior and the physical nature around them are described. And side by side with this direct version of a human experience is a wrong the clear, firm dogmas of a fanatic doctrinaire, 18th century rationalist, doctrines not fused with the life that he describes, but superimposed upon it, like windows with rigorously symmetrical patterns drawn upon them, unrelated to the world on which the open and yet achieving kind of illusionary artistic and intellectual unity with it, owing to the unbounded vitality and the constructive genius of the writing itself. It is one of the most extraordinary performances in the history of literature. The enemy is always the same: experts, professionals, men who claim special authority over other men. University and professors are a frequent target for attack. There are intimations of his authority in the section entitled Youth, with the early autobiographical novel. There is something 18th century, reminiscent both of Voltaire and of Bentham, about Tolstoy's devastating accounts of the dull and the incompetent professor as the desperately bored and obscure students in Russian in his time. The tone is universally in the 19th century, dry, ironical, didactic, mordant, and once withering and entertaining, the whole based on the contrast between the harmonious simplicity of nature and the self-destructive complications created by the malice and stupidity of men. Men from whom the author feels himself detached, whom he affects not to understand, and mocks from a distance. When is the earliest beginning of the theme which grew obsessed in Tolstoy's later life, that the solution to all our perplexities stares at us in the face, that the answer is about us everywhere, like the light of the day. If only we would not close our eyes or look everywhere, but at what is there, staring at us in the face, the clear, simple, irresistible truth. Like Rousseau and Kant and the believers in natural law, Tolstoy was convinced that men have certain basic material and spiritual needs in all places and all times. These needs are fulfilled, they lead harmonious lives, which is the goal of the nature, moral, aesthetic, and our spiritual values are objective and internal. The man's inner harmony depends upon his correct relationships to this. Moreover, all his life, he defended the proposition, which his own novels and sketches do not embody, that the human beings are more harmonious in childhood than under the corrupting influences of education in later life. And also that the simple people, peasants, Cossacks, and so on, have a more natural and correct attitude towards these basic values than civilized men. And they are free and independent in the sense in which civilized men are not. For he insists on this over and over again. Peasant committed in the position to supply their own material and spiritual needs out of their own resources, provided that they are not robbed or enslaved by oppressors and exploiters. Whereas the civilized man needed for the survival the forced labor of others, serfs, slaves, exploited masses, called ironically dependents because their master depends on them. The masters are parasitic upon others. They are degraded not merely by the fact that to enslave and exploit others is a denial of such objective values as justice, equality, human dignity, love, well, which man crave to realize because they can't help this, because they are men. But for the further and to him even more important reason, that to live unrobbed of borrowed goods and so feel to be self-sustaining, falsify natural feelings and perceptions, corrodes men morally, and make them both wicked and miserable. The human ideal is a society of free and equal men, who live and think by the light of what is true and right, and so are not in conflict with each other or themselves. This is a form, a very simple one, of the classical doctrine of natural law, whether in its theoretical or secular, liberal, anarchist form. To it, Tolstoy adheres all his life, as much in his secular period as much after his conversion. His early story expresses vividly the Cossacks, Lukashka, and Uncle Yeroshka are morally superior as well as happier and aesthetically more harmonious beings than Olenin in the Cossacks. Olenin knows this, indeed, that is the heart of the situation. Pierre in War and Peace and Levin in Anna Karenina. Karenina has a sense of this in simple peasant, the soldiers. So does Nikolaevdov in the morning of a landowner. This conviction filled Tolstoy's mind to greater and greater degree until it overshadowed all other influences in the later works. Resurrection and the death of Ivan Ilyich are not intelligible without it. Tolstoy's critical thoughts constantly revolve around this essential notion, the contrast between nature and artifice, truth and invention. When, for instance, in the 1890s, he laid down conditions of excellence in art in the course of an introduction to a Russian translation for Maupassant's stories. He demanded of all writers, in the first place, the possession of sufficient talent. In the second, that the subject itself must be morally important. Finally, that they must truly love what was worthy of love and hate what was worthy hate in what they describe. Commit themselves, retain the direct moral vision of a child who would not maim the natures by practicing self-imposed, self-lacerating and always illusory impartiality and detachment, or still worse, deliberate perversion of natural values. Talent is not given equally to all men, but everyone can, if he tries, discover internal, unchanging attributes, what is good and what is bad, what is important and what is trivial. Only false, made-up theories delude men and writers about this, as to distort the lives and creative activity. Tolstoy applies this criterion literally, almost mechanically. Thus, Nekrasov, according to him, treated the subjects of a profound importance and possessed superb skill as a writer. But his attitude towards his suffering peasant, to crush idealists, remained chilly and unreal. Dostoevsky's subjects lack nothing in seriousness. It is concerns profound, genial, but the first condition is unfulfilled. It is diffuse and repetitive. He does not know how to tell the truth clearly and then to stop. Turgenev, on the other hand, is judged to be both an excellent writer and stand in a real morally adequate relation to his subject, but he feels not on the second account. The subject too subscribed and trivial, and for this no degree of integrity or skill can compensate. Content determines the form, never form content. If the content is too small or trivial, nothing will save the work of the artist. The whole opposite of this, to believe in the primacy of a form, is to sacrifice truth. To end by producing works that are uncontrived. This is no harsh word. There is no harsh word in Tolstoy's entire critical vocabulary than made up, indicating that the writer did not truly experience or imagine, but it merely composed, made up, that which he is purporting to describe. So too, Tolstoy maintained that a peasant whose gifts he admired greatly betrayed his genius precisely owing to false or walk theories of this kind. Yet he remained nonetheless a good writer to the degree to which, like Balaam, although he might have met the cursed virtue, he could not help discerning what was good, and this perception that attracted his love to it and forced him against his own will towards the truth. Talent is vision. Vision reveal the truth. Truth is internal and objective. To see the truth about nature, about conduct, to see it directly and vividly as only managing sort of seeing a simple human being or a child can see it, then to deny or tamper with the vision in cold blood, no matter for the sake of what, is monstrous, unnatural, a symptom of a deeply diseased character. Truth is discoverable. To follow it is to be good, inwardly sound, harmonious. Yet it's clear that our society is not harmonious and composed of internally harmonious individuals. The interests of the educated minority, what Tolstoy calls the professors, the barons, and the backers, oppose those of the majority, the peasants, the poor. Each side is indifferent to or mocks the value of the other. Even those who, like Olenin, Pierre, Nikolaevich, Levin, realize the spuriousness of the values of the professors, barons, and backers, the moral decay in which the forced education has involved them. Even those who are truly contrite cannot, despite slow welfare pretensions, go native and merge with the mass of the common people. Are they too corrupt ever to recover the innocence? Is their case hopeless? Or can it be that civilized men had acquired or discovered certain true values of their own, values which barbarians and children knew nothing of, but which they, the civilized, cannot lose or forget, even if by some impossible means they can transform themselves into peasants of the free and happy Cossacks of the Don on the Terek? This is one of the central and most tormenting problems in Tolstoy's life, to which he goes back again and again, into which he returns conflicting answers. Tolstoy knows that he himself clearly belonged to the minority of barons, backer, professors. He knows the symptoms of his condition only too well. He cannot, for example, deny his passionate love for the music of Mozart or Chopin, or the poetry of Tolstoy or Pushkin, the ripest fruits of civilization. He cannot do without the printed words and all the elaborate paraphernalia of the culture in which such lives are led and such works of art are created. But what is the use of Pushkin to village boys when his words are not intelligible to them? What real benefits has the invention of printing brought the peasants? We are told, Tolstoy observed, that boosts educated society, that is, make them more corrupt. It was written words that was promoted the emancipation of the serfs in Russia. Tolstoy denied this. The government would have done the same without books or pamphlets. Pushkin's Boris Godunov places only him, Tolstoy, but to the peasant it means nothing. The triumph of civilization, telegraph tell him about his sister's health, about the prospect of a king, Otto the First of grace, but what benefit do the masses gain from it? It is they who pay and have always paid for it all. They know this well. The peasants kill doctors in the cholera riots because they regard them as poisoners. What they do is no doubt wrong, but these murders are no accident. The instinct which tells the peasants who the oppressors are is a sound, and the doctor belonged to that class. Wanda and Domoska played to the villagers of Yosnaya, Polyana. The great majority of them remains unresponsive. It can't be doubted that it is the simple people who lead the least broken lives, immeasurably superior to the warped and tormented lives of the rich and educated. The common people, Tolstoy asserted in his early educational tracts, are subsistent, not only materially, but spiritually. folk songs, the aliens, the Bible, spring from the people itself, and is therefore intelligible to all men everywhere. And the marvelous poem Silent Hymn by Tolstoy, Chekhov, or Don Giovanni of the Ninth Symphony is not. But the ideal of man lies not in the future, but in the past. Once upon a time there was the Garden of Eden, and in it dwells the uncorrupted human soul, and the Bible and the rules so conceived it, and then came the fall, corruption, suffering, falsification. It is a mere blindness, Tolstoy says over and over again, to believe, as liberals, all socialists, the progressives believe, that the golden age is still before us, that history is a story of improvement. The material advance in natural science or material skills coincided with a real moral advance. The truth is the reverse of this. The child is closer to the ideal harmony than the grown man, and the simple peasant than the torn, alienated, morally and spiritually unanchored, self-destructive parasites who form the civilized elite. This doctrine springs Tolstoy's the notable anti-individualism, and in particular its diagnosis of the individual's will as a source of misdirection and perversion from natural human tendencies, and hence the conviction derived largely from Schopenhauer's doctrine of the will as the source of frustration, and that to plan, organize, rely on science, try to create rational balanced life in accordance with rational theories, is to swim against the stream of nature, to close one's eye to the saving truth within us, to torture facts, to feed artificial schemata, and torture human beings to fit social and economic systems against which the nature cries out. And the same sort, too, comes the obverse of this. Also, the faith in the intuitively grasp direction of a thing as not merely inevitable, but objectively, prudentially good, and therefore providentially good, and therefore belief in the need to submit to it, is a quietism. This one aspect is teaching the most famous, most central idea of the Tolstoyan movement. It runs through all his works, imaginative, critical, didactic, from the Cossacks, family happiness, to his lost religious tracts. This is the doctrine which the liberals and Marxists condemned. It is in this mode that Tolstoy maintains that to imagine that a heroic personality determines is a peaceful colossal megalomania, a self-deception. The narrative is designed to show the insignificance of Napoleon or Tsar Alexander, or of the aristocratic, the bureaucratic society Anna Karenina, all of the judges, the official persons in resurrection, or again the emptiness and intellectual impotence of historians, philosophers who try to explain events by employing concepts like power, which is attributed to great men, or influence ascribed to writers, orators, preachers, words, abstractions, which in his view explain nothing, being themselves far more obscure than the facts for which they purport to account. He maintains that we do not begin to understand, and therefore cannot explain or analyze, what is to wield authority or strength to influence, to dominate. Explains that they do not explain are for Tolstoy the symptom of the disrupted, the self-inflated intellect, the faculty that destroys innocence and leads to false ideas as the ruin of a human life. This is a strain inspired by Rousseau and present in early Romanticism, which inspired primitivism in art, in life, not in Russian alone. Tolstoy imagines that he and others can find the path to the truth about how one should live by observing simple people, by the study of the Gospels. His other string is the direct opposite of this. Mikhailowski says with justice that all in him cannot, charmed as he is by the Caucasus and Cossack ideal, transform himself into Lakashaka, return to the childlike harmony, which in his case is long being broken. Everyone knows that if he tried to become a peasant, this could only be a grossier farce, which the peasant would be the first to perceive and deride. Yet appeared Nicholas Rostov knows obscurely that in some sense he has something to gain that the peasants have not. Tolstoy tells the educated reader that the peasant need what your life of 10 generations, uncrushed by hard labor, has given you. You have the leisure to search, to think, to suffer. Then give him that for whose sake you suffered, he is in need of it. Do not bury in the earth the talent given to you by history. Leisure, then, need not be merely destructive. Progress can occur. We can learn from what happened in the past, and those who in the past could not. It is true that we're living in an unjust order, but this itself created direct obligation. Those who are members of the civilized elite, cut off and transitory are from the mass of the people, have the duty to attempt to create broken humanity, to stop exploiting them, to give them what they most need: education, knowledge, material help, and capacity for living better lives. Living in Anna Karenina, as Mikhailovsky remarks, it takes up where Nikolai Rostov in War and Peace left off. They are not quietists, yet what they do is right. The emancipation of the peasants in Tolstoy's view was not go far enough, was nevertheless an act of will, goodwill, on the part of the government. Now it is necessary to teach peasants to read, to write, to grasp the rules of arithmetic, sometimes something which they cannot do for themselves, to equip them for the use of freedom. I cannot merge myself with the mass of a peasant, but I can list is the fruit of the unjustly obtained leisure myself and my ancestors, my education, knowledge, skills, for the benefit of those whose labor made it possible. This is a talent I may not bury. I must work to promote a just society in accordance with those object standards which all men except the helplessly corrupt see and accept, whether they live by them or not. The simple see them more clearly, the sophisticated more dimly, but all men can see them if they try. Indeed, to be able to see them is a part of what is to be a man. When injustice is perpetrated, I have an obligation to speak out and against it. Nor any artist may, any more than others, sit with folded hands. What makes good writer good is ability to see truth, social, individual, material, and spiritual, and so presented that it cannot be escaped. Also the whole and Maupassant, for example, is doing precisely this. Despite himself, his aesthetic fallacies, he may, because he is a corrupt human being, take the side of the bad against the good, write about a worldly parish seducer with great sympathy than he felt for his victims, but provided that he tells the truth at a level that is sufficiently profound. And a man's talent cannot avoid doing this. He will face the reader with the fundamental moral questions, whether he means to do this or that, questions which the reader can neither escape nor answer without rigorous and painful self-examination. This is for Tolstoy to open the path to regeneration. It is a proper function for art. Vocation, talent, is obedience to an inner need to fulfill its artist's purpose, its duty. Nothing is more false than really the artist as a provider, or a craftsman whose sole function is to create a beautiful thing, as a Flaubert or Renan or Maupassant maintain. There's only one human goal. It is equally binding on all men. landowners, doctors, barons, professors, bankers, peasants, to tell the truth and be guided by it in action, that is, to do good and persuade others to do so. And God exists. Or that the Iliad is a beautiful, or that men have a right to be free and also equal, are all internal absolute truths. Therefore, we must persuade men to read the Iliad and not pornographic French novels, and to work for an equal society, not theoretical or political hierarchy. Coercion is evil. Man has always known this to be true. Therefore, they must work for a society in which there will be no wars, no prisons, no executions, no executions in any circumstances, for any reason, from the society in which individual freedom exists to the maximum degree. By his own routes, Tolstoy write and a program of Christian anarchism, which had much in common with that of the Russian populists, with whom, but for their doctrinaire socialism and their belief in science, the faith in the message for terrorism. Also, the attitude has much in common. For what he now appeared to be advocating was a program of action, not of a criticism. This program underlay the educational reform that he intended to carry out. It showed to discover, collect, expound internal truths, awaken the spontaneous interest, imagination, love, curiosity of children or simple folk. Above all, to liberate their natural, moral, emotional, and intellectual forces, which he did not doubt, and Rousseau did not doubt, would achieve harmony within man between them, provided we limited everything that might maim, cramp, or kill them.